"Clara Bennett, you are coming with me." The marshal said it in the middle of Main Street, with one hand resting near the folded warrant in his coat and the other already reaching for her arm. Clara had been carrying a basket of mended shirts from the back room of Mrs. Pruitt's laundry, the sleeves folded clean, the collars pressed flat, each piece tied with brown string because work was the one thing in her life that still answered properly when she touched it. The basket slipped lower against her hip, but she did not drop it. Across the street, men came out of the feed store. Two women stopped in front of the mercantile with flour sacks held tight to their waists. The barber stood in his doorway with a towel over one shoulder. Nobody asked what she had done. They had been waiting years for someone important to say aloud what they had only said in kitchens and behind gloved hands. The marshal was a heavy man with dust on his cuffs and a badge that caught the morning sun. He had ridden in less than an hour before, tied his horse outside the jail, and gone straight to the washhouse as if he had known exactly where to find her. Clara noticed small things because small things kept a person steady. A loose nail in the boardwalk. A child's blue wool scarf caught on the hitching rail near the general store. The smell of hot bread from the bakery, almost strong enough to make the street feel kind. She stood with the basket between herself and the marshal and kept her chin level. The town liked it better when a woman cried. Tears gave them something to forgive or something to enjoy. Clara had learned not to offer either. "There must be some mistake," Mrs. Pruitt said from the washhouse door, but she said it softly, with one hand still on the frame and her body not moving past it. Clara did not blame her for that. People in Mercy Crossing had families, accounts, reputations, sons who needed apprenticeships and daughters who needed invitations. Clara had none of those things to protect. She had one rented room behind the laundry, 2 dresses, a tin of needles, and a strip of blue wool she had meant to return to the Walker boy before supper. Noah Walker had left it 3 days earlier when he came by with a torn sleeve and a silence too large for an 8-year-old. Clara had mended the sleeve, warmed a biscuit on the stove, and set both beside him without asking questions. He had watched her hands the way hungry children watched ovens. Now the scarf moved in the wind at the rail, bright against the dust, and Clara looked at it one moment too long. From the far end of the street, Ethan Walker stepped out of the hardware store with a sack of nails in one hand and a coil of baling wire over his shoulder. He saw the crowd first, then the marshal, then Clara's basket held too tight against her waist. He did not hurry. Hurrying made men look frightened, and Ethan Walker never gave the town that satisfaction. He set the nails on the boardwalk, lowered the wire beside them, and crossed the street with his hat brim shadowing his eyes. The marshal took Clara by the elbow. Not hard, not yet, but enough that every person watching understood she was no longer free to walk back inside. Clara's fingers closed around the basket handle until the reed pressed marks into her palm. Ethan stopped at the edge of the crowd. He looked once at the marshal's hand on her arm, then at the blue scarf caught on the rail. He picked it up, folded it carefully, and held it in his work-rough hand as if it were something that mattered. Clara saw that small act before she saw anything else. The street had gone quiet enough to hear a horse stamp near the livery. Then, from somewhere behind the mercantile barrels, a child drew one sharp breath, and the whole town turned before the sound even became a word. The word did not come yet. It caught somewhere behind the barrels, small and frightened, and Clara felt the marshal's fingers tighten before she saw who had made the sound. Noah Walker stood half-hidden near the mercantile steps, one hand on a flour barrel, his shirt sleeve patched with Clara's careful stitches. His hat sat crooked on his head. His face had the pale, stubborn look of a child trying not to run and already knowing he would. Ethan saw him too. He did not call out. He only stepped a little closer, the blue scarf folded once over his palm. Noah's eyes went from the marshal's hand to Clara's face, then down to the basket of mended shirts. 3 days ago, he had sat at her wash-house table with that same basket beside him while rain tapped the back window and the stove made the room smell of starch, soap, and yesterday's biscuits. He had not asked for food. Clara had set half a biscuit on a saucer and pushed it near his elbow as if it had simply belonged there. When he finished it, she gave him the other half. No ceremony. No pity. That was how she did things. A button fixed before a boy had to ask. A torn cuff turned under clean. A cup of water set within reach. Once, when he fell asleep with his cheek on her folded linens, she kept working around him and let the room stay quiet. Mercy Crossing had seen none of that. The town saw what it preferred. A woman with no husband. A room behind the laundry. A name attached to an old rumor that had crossed county lines faster than any letter could correct it. Years earlier, a bank note had gone missing from a boarding house where Clara worked, and the woman who found it later never admitted where it had been. By then Clara had already been dismissed. After that, people handed her torn things but not invitations. They trusted her with cuffs, hems, and collars, but not with Sunday tables. Clara had stopped defending herself because defense required listeners. She had built a life out of hot irons, soap water, needlework, and closed doors. Now the marshal held her in daylight, and every closed door had opened just enough to watch. Ethan moved beside his son at last. He crouched, not low enough to make a spectacle of tenderness, only enough to look the boy in the face. He offered the scarf without a word. Noah took it, but he did not put it on. He clutched it to his chest and looked past his father at Clara. The marshal cleared his throat and started to turn her toward the jail. Clara shifted the basket carefully so the folded shirts would not spill into the dust. That was when Noah stepped off the mercantile walk. Noah did not run at first. He walked as if the distance from the mercantile steps to Clara's basket were something he had measured before, 5 small strides across packed dust, past Mrs. Holt's blue skirt, past the barber's pole, past the place where men had begun pretending they were only there by accident. His boots stopped inches from the marshal's shadow. The scarf was crushed in both hands. Ethan stayed behind him, close enough to reach, far enough not to take the choice away. That was the first thing Clara noticed. A child could feel the difference between being guided and being handled. Noah had felt too much of the second since his mother's fever took her the winter before. Women came to the Walker place in the months after, carrying pies, folded advice, and the kind of pity that wanted to be thanked. Noah learned to disappear under the loft stairs or out behind the chicken shed until they left. Clara had never come to the ranch. He had come to her. First with a split cuff. Then with a torn pocket. Then with no tear at all, only a school primer under one arm and a question about a word he already knew. Clara never made him explain why he stayed. She gave him work small enough for his hands. She let him win thread, sort buttons, carry cooled irons back to the shelf. Once, when a delivery man spoke over him like he was a stool in the room, Clara waited until the man left, then handed Noah the receipt and asked him to read the numbers back. He had stood straighter the rest of the afternoon. Those were not grand rescues. They were ordinary things done over and over until a lonely child began to trust the shape of a chair beside her stove. Ethan had seen parts of it without naming them. A mended sleeve that held better than his own rough stitching. A biscuit wrapped in a clean cloth in Noah's coat pocket. The boy coming home with less silence in his shoulders. Ethan had meant to pay Clara for the sewing himself, then had stopped outside the laundry twice and turned back, uncertain what a widower was allowed to notice without giving the town more to chew on. Now he watched his son stand before a badge and a crowd, holding the blue scarf like proof. Noah looked up at Clara. His mouth trembled once. Then he reached for the edge of her basket, not to take it, only to steady it, the way she had steadied so many small things for him. The marshal glanced down at Noah's hand on the basket and frowned as if the child had stepped into business too large for him. "Move aside, boy." Noah did not move. Clara felt the basket steady between them, one small hand against the reed, one small face turned upward in a courage too young to understand its own cost. Ethan came closer then. Not fast. Not loud. He placed himself at Noah's left shoulder, close enough that the boy could lean back if he needed to, but he did not touch him yet. The blue scarf hung from Noah's fist, twisted and warm from his grip. Clara kept her eyes on the marshal's sleeve, on the dust caught in the seam, on the silver edge of the badge. Looking at Noah would undo something she needed held together. "This is not a place for children," the marshal said. Ethan looked at him then, calm and level. "Then take your hand off a woman in front of one." He did not raise his voice. That was why people heard it. The marshal's jaw worked once, but his hand loosened a little on Clara's elbow. It was not freedom. It was space enough to breathe. Mrs. Pruitt came down one step from the washhouse door, then stopped, wiping wet hands on her apron though there was nothing left to dry. The schoolteacher moved her books from one arm to the other. The baker's wife looked toward the basket and seemed to recognize her husband's white shirt folded on top, the cuff repaired so neatly no one had noticed the tear was gone. Clara saw these little reckonings move through the crowd like wind through grass. Ethan saw them too. For weeks, he had been watching without letting himself call it watching. Noah bringing home clean handkerchiefs folded into squares. Noah reading labels from feed sacks because Clara had made numbers less frightening. Noah setting his cup by the sink instead of leaving it on the table because she had thanked him once for helping and meant it. The changes had been practical first. That mattered to Ethan. A grieving child did not become less lonely because of soft words. He became steadier because someone gave him a job. Fed him without making hunger shameful, and let him sit in quiet until quiet stopped feeling empty. Ethan had failed to see the whole shape of it until the street gathered around her. Now the shape stood plain. Clara had been mothering without claiming. Noah had been belonging without permission. The marshal reached into his coat for the paper. Noah's fingers tightened on the basket. He swallowed hard, lifted the scarf in both hands like an offering, and pressed it against Clara's skirt. "You forgot this at our table," he said, though everyone knew she had never been invited there. The lie of that small sentence landed harder than any accusation had. Clara had never sat at the Walker table. She knew the shape of it only from Noah's crumbs, from the gravy stain on a napkin he once brought folded in his coat, from the way he described the empty chair beside the stove without meaning to describe it at all. Still, the boy held up the scarf as if the table had already made room for her, as if belonging could be spoken into the street and become true by the force of a child's need. Clara looked down at the blue wool. She had washed it by hand after finding it under the laundry bench, worked the mud from the fringe with soap and patience, and mended the thin place near one corner with thread close enough in color that Noah would not be embarrassed by it. No one in the crowd knew that. No one had seen her warm his biscuits against the stove door, or sharpen his pencil with her sewing knife, or fold his school paper inside oilcloth so rain would not take the ink before he reached home. Those things had been too small for witness. That was why they had mattered. The marshal unfolded the warrant. Paper crackled in the quiet. "This woman is wanted in Fairbend County for theft of bank funds under the name Clara May Bennett." A murmur moved through the crowd, quick and hungry, then stopped when Noah stepped closer to Clara instead of away. The basket tilted. Ethan reached forward and took it from her before it could spill, holding the town's mended shirts against his chest as naturally as if carrying her burden had been his business all along. Clara's arm felt suddenly bare. Without the weight. She had carried work for so long that losing it made her less steady, not more. Ethan noticed. He set the basket on the top step of the washhouse, safe from dust, and returned to Noah's shoulder. Practical first. Always practical. Then he looked at the marshal. "Fairbend is 70 miles east. Who signed the complaint?" The marshal glanced at the paper. "Harold Voss, bank clerk." Clara's hands went still. Not frightened still. Remembering still. Mrs. Pruitt drew in a breath from the doorway. She knew that name. Half the town did. Harold Voss had passed through Mercy Crossing 2 months before, selling polished stories and taking credit wherever credit could be found. Clara had seen him from the wash-house window and locked the back door with wet hands. She had not told anyone why. Telling had never helped before. Noah turned then, pressing the blue scarf against Clara's wrist. "She did not take anything," he said. His voice shook, but it held. "She gives things back." The words should not have carried. They did. Mrs. Holt looked down at the repaired hem of her own skirt. The baker's wife touched her husband's shirt cuff in the basket. The schoolteacher remembered the slate cloth Clara had replaced without charge after the younger children wore it through. Small debts rose all over the street, ordinary and undeniable. Ethan removed his hat and handed it to Noah, giving the boy something solid to hold. Then he stepped between Clara and the marshal, not close enough to challenge the law, only close enough that the marshal would have to look past an honest man to keep treating her like an easy answer. "Read the date," Ethan said. The marshal looked irritated, then looked down. October 12th. Clara lifted her eyes. On October 12th, she had been in Mercy Crossing all day, boiling linens during the influenza scare, carrying clean sheets to 3 houses, and sitting with Noah while Ethan rode 8 miles for medicine. Ethan knew it. Mrs. Pruitt knew it. The schoolteacher knew it. Even the baker's wife knew it, because Clara had left bread on her porch when her husband's fever rose. The town shifted, not with drama, but with the slow discomfort of people finding truth under their own feet. Noah wrapped the scarf around Clara's wrist like a bandage. Ethan looked at the knot, then at Clara, and for the first time he did not look away. The marshal read the date again, slower this time, as if the numbers might change under his eyes. They did not. October 12th lay on the paper as plain as stitching on white cloth, and Mercy Crossing began remembering the day in pieces. Mrs. Pruitt remembered Clara standing over the copper tubs before sunrise, sleeves pinned up, steam dampening the loose hair at her temples while she boiled sheets for the sick rooms. The schoolteacher remembered sending 2 older girls with a bundle of towels and seeing Clara mark each family's name with thread so nothing would be lost. The baker's wife remembered finding a covered bowl of broth on her back step and a heel of bread wrapped against the cold. No note. Clara never left notes. She only left things where they were needed. The marshal folded the warrant halfway, then stopped. A warrant did not like uncertainty. Neither did a town. Ethan turned to Noah and took his hat back gently, brushing dust from the brim before setting it on his own head. He did not touch Clara's wrist, but his eyes rested a moment on the blue scarf tied there. Noah had made the knot too loose. Clara fixed it with 2 fingers, practical and neat, and that small motion seemed to give the boy permission to breathe. "I was at the Walker place that afternoon," she said. Not loud. Not pleading. Just enough for the nearest people to hear. "Mrs. Pruitt sent clean sheets out with me. Mr. Walker had ridden for medicine. Noah had a fever." Ethan nodded once. He remembered returning near dusk, horse-lathered, medicine wrapped inside his coat, and finding the stove burning steady. Noah had been asleep under a quilt in the chair by the hearth, his hair damp, his cup washed and set upside down on the table. Clara had been gone by then. The only proof she had been there was a stack of folded linen, a kettle filled, and the latch on the back door repaired with a strip of leather so the wind would stop pushing it open. He had noticed the latch the next morning. He had meant to thank her. He had not. That failure stood beside him now as real as any man. Mrs. Pruitt came forward at last, one full step into the street. "She was here that morning," she said, wiping her hands again because courage sometimes needed something to do. The schoolteacher followed. "And at my schoolhouse before noon." The baker's wife lifted the white shirt from Clara's basket, showing the repaired cuff. "And at my place before dark." The words were plain. Work records, sickroom errands, boiled linen, delivered bread. Not sentiment. Evidence. The kind a frontier town understood because survival was built out of who showed up and who did not. Noah leaned against Clara's side then, tired from being brave. She did not put her arm around him at first. She looked to Ethan. A question without words. Ethan answered by shifting one step nearer, making space around them both. Only then did Clara rest her hand lightly on Noah's shoulder. The boy closed his eyes. The marshal looked from face to face, and for the first time since he had ridden in, he seemed less certain of the road ahead. Ethan picked up Clara's basket from the step and held it out to her, but when she reached for it, he did not let go right away. Not to keep it from her. To steady the weight between them. The basket stayed between Clara and Ethan for one quiet second, full of other people's shirts, other people's proof, other people's need. Then Noah swayed against Clara's skirt. The street had kept him standing too long. Clara saw it before anyone else did. His face had gone pale around the mouth, the way it had on the October afternoon when fever left him weak and cross with being helped. She let Ethan take the basket fully, then bent and placed one hand behind Noah's shoulders. Not dramatic. Not possessive. Just steady. He needs shade, Mrs. Pruitt said, already moving toward the wash-house door. Clara shook her head once, then looked toward the Walker wagon tied near the feed store, where a folded quilt lay across the seat and a water jug sat beneath it. She did not ask permission from the town. She guided Noah there slowly, matching his steps, the blue scarf still tied around her wrist. Ethan followed with the basket in one hand and his other hand free in case the boy needed him. At the wagon, Clara lifted the quilt, shook the dust from it, and spread it over the shaded board beside the seat. She checked the water jug, poured a little into the tin cup hanging from the rail, and waited until Noah had both hands around it before letting go. These were not the actions of a woman trying to prove innocence. They were the actions of someone who had already chosen what mattered most. The marshal stood with the half-folded warrant in his hand, watching the woman he had come to take cool a child's forehead with the edge of her own sleeve. Ethan watched too, but differently now. He remembered his house after his wife died, all its corners clean enough and still somehow untended. He remembered Noah eating supper in silence, pushing peas around a plate, leaving half his biscuit untouched. Then he remembered the first evening the boy came home from Clara's laundry with thread on his cuff and ate everything set before him. A child did not heal all at once. He came back by inches. Clara had given him inches. She had given them without asking for a place at the table. Noah finished the water and leaned into the quilt. Clara tucked the loose edge around his knees because the morning wind had turned sharp. The scarf tugged at her wrist as she moved. Ethan set the basket in the wagon bed, took his work gloves from his pocket, and laid them beside it. Then he went to the horse, loosened the check strap, and rubbed the animal's neck until it settled. Work before words. That was how he kept from saying too much too soon. The marshal stepped closer. "Ma'am, this does not settle the warrant." Clara straightened, but Noah caught the edge of her skirt. She looked down. He did not speak. He only held on. Ethan came back from the horse and stood beside them, close enough that the wagon shaded all three. "No," Ethan said, calm as fence wire pulled straight. "But it settles whether she runs." Clara looked at the road east, the road that had carried every rumor faster than truth. Then she untied the blue scarf from her wrist, folded it once, and placed it around Noah's neck where it belonged. Her hand stayed there just long enough to make the knot right. When she turned back to the marshal, she did not step away from the Walker wagon. The marshal looked at the Walker wagon, at Noah under the quilt, at Clara standing beside him, and at Ethan planted there with one hand resting on the wagon rail. The street waited for a speech. Ethan gave it work instead. He took the warrant from the marshal's hand only after the man allowed it, read the names, the date, the county seal, and the signature at the bottom. Then he handed it to the schoolteacher. "You keep the attendance book," he said. She understood at once and turned toward the schoolhouse without another word. Mrs. Pruitt went back inside the laundry and returned with her ledger, pages swollen from steam, every bundle marked by date and family name. The baker's wife sent her oldest boy running for the delivery slate. No one was weeping. No one was declaring anything. The town was doing what it should have done years ago. It was checking the work. Clara stood very still while evidence gathered around her in aprons, ink, flour dust, and ordinary handwriting. Ethan hitched his team properly, tightening the traces, checking the wheel pin, making the wagon ready though no one had said where they were going. When Mrs. Pruitt's ledger reached him, he held it flat against the wagon side so the marshal could read the October 12th entries. Boiled linens. Walker Place. Schoolhouse. Mercer Bakery. Clara Bennett's mark appeared beside each one in small, even script. The schoolteacher arrived with her book open to the same date. Noah Walker absent for fever. Sheets delivered by Clara Bennett. Medicine fetched by Ethan Walker. The baker's slate came next, with a chalk note still faint beneath newer accounts. Broth returned. Bread left. Clara saw her own days laid bare in front of people who had never cared to look. The marshal's face changed by inches. Certainty first loosened, then left. He folded the warrant and slipped it into his coat, but he did not reach for Clara again. "I will wire Fairbend," he said. Ethan nodded, then lifted Clara's basket from the wagon bed and set it beside Noah's feet, where she could reach it without stepping back into the crowd. That was the choice. Not a speech. A place made in the wagon. Work respected. A child kept near. Clara looked at the basket, then at Noah's scarf, blue against his throat. Noah patted the quilt beside him. Ethan climbed to the front bench and took up the reins, leaving room beside him without looking back to see if she would accept it. Clara placed one hand on the wagon rail. Behind her, Mercy Crossing had gone quiet again, but it was not the same silence as before. Clara climbed into the wagon without anyone helping her. She set the basket beside Noah's boots, smoothed the quilt over his knees, and sat where there was room, not crowded against Ethan, not far from him either. Ethan clicked to the team, and the wheels began turning through the middle of Mercy Crossing at a slow, plain pace. No one cheered. That would have made it smaller than it was. Mrs. Pruitt stood with her ledger against her chest. The schoolteacher held her book open in both hands. The baker's wife touched the repaired cuff once before lowering her eyes. At the edge of town, Noah leaned against Clara's side and fell asleep before the last storefront passed behind them. Clara kept one hand lightly on his shoulder so the wagon's ruts would not wake him. Ethan drove with both hands on the reins. After a mile, he reached beneath the bench, took out a wrapped biscuit, and set it beside Clara without looking at her. It was still warm. She looked at it, then at the road ahead, then broke it in half and placed the larger piece in Noah's lap for when he woke. Ethan saw that. He said nothing. By the time they reached the Walker place, late sun lay across the porch boards and the house looked less empty than Clara remembered from Noah's stories. Ethan carried her basket inside and set it near the stove. Noah woke enough to climb down, then took the blue scarf from his neck and laid it across the back of the chair beside the table. Not by the door. Not on a hook. At the table. Clara stood just inside the threshold with her hands folded around nothing. Ethan washed at the basin, dried his hands, and pulled out that chair without ceremony. Noah climbed into his own and reached for the biscuit. The stove gave off a steady heat. The kettle began to whisper. Clara looked at the chair, at the scarf, at the basket by the stove, and then sat down. Ethan set 3 cups on the table. This time, one of them was already hers.